2 years ago, I made a video where I ranked every Assassin's Creed game from worst to best, and let's just say I got a lot of hate for it. However, since then, not only have I replayed every single Assassin's Creed game, but we also had AC Shadows release too, and my thinking has changed pretty massively. Now, do remember that this is all just my opinion, so don't get too mad if I rank your favourite game last, but with that being said, let's kick things off with my worst rated AC game, Assassin's Creed 1. So this one might get me even more hate than my last video. Now, I can remember playing this when I was about 15 years old, and don't get me wrong, for the time, for the first edition in the series, this was groundbreaking. It introduced us to the Assassin's Creed concept and Hidden One fantasy, offering a mix of some quite honestly, and still to this day, awesome parkour that gives you a lot of choice and control, offering mechanics that we don't see in AC games today, with the world aiding to it so well. We have 3 cities, all of which are a constant mix of high and low buildings, tons of parkour paths, and loads of different beams and structures for us to hop around on to our heart's content. It's truly amazing how great the parkour is in this game considering how old it is, and how even now, it's better than the last 10 years of other AC games parkour. The stealth, and bear in mind at this point in time we'd played games like Splinter Cell, Hitman and Metal Gear Solid, but never really anything without guns, was pretty good, with blending into crowds, hiding in hay bales, and a throwing knife to take enemies out from a distance. It's not something I would say is too fluid, it's all quite slow to use, but for the first go, it's a solid attempt. The combat, even whilst obviously dated, this game is nearing a massive 20 years old, was also pretty good, offering a number of mechanics like grab, counter grab, heavy attack, defense break, dodge and combo kill, with the newer AC games now having far less mechanics. It's overall a bit of a slog and dated, but still a decent experience. Its last positive, for me anyway, is that the ambience and the vibe of this game is immaculate. That first time when you arrive in Jerusalem after travelling through the canyon and the drums and the horns hit you, it's honestly a cultural defining moment. However, that's kind of where the positive ends for me. Story-wise, and like I said, I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, I just think it's pretty disappointing. Our protagonist Altair is almost emotionless and honestly kind of a prick, and whilst I get from a character perspective he's basically supposed to be like that, and yes, as we reach the end of the story he definitely grows as a character, but having replayed it recently, the whole thing to me is just kinda boring. I do like the theme of am I killing the right people, and being the first Assassin's Creed game, the modern day segments are way more integrated, but it's ultimately a very simple story which to me gets repetitive within the first few hours. This is reflected too in the constant gameplay loop, where you head to a city, then the Bureau, complete some side missions to locate the target, kill the target, escape or kill some guards, return to the Bureau, and then rinse and repeat. Granted, this is prevalent in other AC games too, but in Assassin's Creed 1 it's almost the entire game, and there was a lot of distance to cover in between these missions, making the pacing of the game feel slow. Even the side content in AC1 is almost non-existent. Other than collecting flags around the world, there isn't really anything else to do. I'm not going to mention the graphics because in what world would that be fair, although I can't not mention that Altair also weirdly can't swim due to a supposed glitch in the Animus. Whilst I have ranked AC1 at the bottom of this list, overall it still has some good elements, but it just doesn't hold up in terms of gameplay, content and story compared to future AC games. I think the reason why people rate this game so highly is pure nostalgia, and if they were to actually pick it up again now, they'd be severely underwhelmed. It does, however, still deserve our respect, as without it, we wouldn't have the series that we all know and love today. Assassin's Creed Mirage. After the bloated RPGs of Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla, this was supposed to be the so-called return to the roots, focusing on the original aspects of Assassin's Creed like stealth and parkour, and in many ways it did achieve that. To start, our single city of Baghdad is in my opinion one of the top 5 settings of the entire franchise. It's dense, alive, and most importantly, is really well built to actually parkour in. Now you probably know that Mirage was initially going to be a DLC to Valhalla, meaning that all of the animations and more was copied over, and whilst in some sense this does hold the game back, because Baghdad is so well built, the parkour ends up being pretty good, with non-stop action, ziplining, cool jumps, rolls, beams and more. It's actually an integral part of the game, rather than a sort of afterthought like the RPG trilogy was. The biggest positive of Mirage is its stealth, and I've said this before, but if I was ever to do a rating of Assassin's Creed game stealth mechanics, Mirage would definitely be in the top 3. We have a variety of tools to use, including throwing knives, sleep darts, noisemakers and smoke bombs, all customizable as the game goes on, meaning you can quite literally build a stealth playstyle to suit you. There is the addition of the controversial Assassin's Focus, which sees you teleporting to and assassinating your enemies, and whilst it is kinda dumb and overpowered, you don't have to use it, and I mostly forget that it exists. The game is also pretty polished too, overall feeling smooth, lacking in bugs, and Basim is pretty responsive in every action you ask him to take. It's a massive shame though that the same cannot be said for the combat, and in fact if we're playing the game of where I would rank the stealth, if I was ranking the combat, Mirage's would be dead last. Not only does it offer only one set of weapons, a sword and a dagger, and only 4 different attack options, light attack, heavy attack, parry and dodge, this isn't even what holds it back. This game is a constant onslaught of parry die, and whilst this could be said for other AC games, it's so uninteresting and dull, I genuinely sigh every time I have to get into combat. A lot of the times the guards don't even react to being hit, completely ruining the immersion and just further dragging down your whole experience. The one benefit of the combat is that the kill animations do look great, even if getting to that stage is dull as anything. People's arguments here are going to be, but stealth is a last resort, Basim isn't supposed to be a good fighter, etc, etc, and whilst sure, I agree with that concept, it doesn't excuse just simply bad gameplay mechanics. Mirage's story too is also one of the weakest in the franchise, offering a dull protagonist known as Basim, the same Basim from Valhalla, incredibly forgettable side characters, and a very simple plot with a small twist at the end, but nothing that's going to blow you away. The voice acting and cutscene animations are also pretty terrible too, which further drags down the poorly written script, in the end giving us a story that I'd describe as meh.
And nag you until you decide to abandon the idea of stealing a chest from the Khalifa's winter palace.
In terms of its content, this game was never intended to be as big as its predecessors and does come with a lower price tag, with the story being completed in around 15 hours, with a further 15 hours of exploration and side content. The actual content we do get though, unfortunately, is really disappointing. Whilst they do have a few black box missions in Mirage, they don't feel that well designed, and there are only a couple of set pieces within this that'll make you go, oh, that was fun. It's all very simple, and just doesn't feel like much time was devoted to the missions at all. The side content too is minimal and largely consists of either collecting something or a handful of missions where you get to help people across Baghdad. It's a shame really. We have a great setting, great stealth and decent parkour, but you don't get that many opportunities in game to actually try it out. With the combat and story being so disappointing, this game for me deserves to be in 13th place. Now in my previous ranking, it had been a few years since I'd picked Rogue up, and I'm ashamed to say I put it in last place. However, since playing it at the beginning of the year, it didn't blow me away, but I had a way more fun time than I expected, and I am now kind of a fan. As Rogue was released on the same day for Unity but for previous generation consoles, and the budget for Rogue was next to nothing, this meant that a lot of the assets were copied over from the wildly popular Black Flag, and surprisingly, this was a good thing. The combat, animations, parkour and stealth aspects are all largely the same, with a few additions to parkour like this cool climbing animation and these sort of scaffold swinging things between buildings, as well as the really cool stealth edition of the rifle, allowing us to fire sleep, poison or berserk darts from a fair distance, as well as another edition of the grenade launcher with similar abilities to the rifle but on a larger scale. These two additions, particularly the rifle, are genuinely awesome and something I actually wish was included in other AC games, as it makes you feel a bit like a sniper and definitely turns us into the longest range assassin yet, aside from the RPG games anyway. On top of that, we also got a new enemy type known as Stalkers, who are basically assassins lurking in the shadows and hunting you, adding a really fun dimension to the game, as well as the infamous naval combat from Black Flag being included and improved too, just further refining that already incredible experience. What I would say though is that because Rogue was developed in a short space of time and with that limited budget, I've personally found it to be a much buggier game than its predecessors, particularly when it comes to its parkour. But still, the additions they made were good, and whilst the game is very similar to Black Flag, these additions help just push it over the edge and make it feel like its own game. Just. The world, whilst consisting of 2 major cities, the same New York from AC3 and Albany, as well as the River Valley and the North Atlantic, does feel kind of lazy. This is particularly outside the cities, as there isn't much reason to stop around and explore, but on the positive side, it does have icebergs and even at times the Northern Lights. However, Rogue suffers from the very thing that should set it apart, and that is its story. I love the concept of playing as an assassin turned Templar, hunting down our previous assassin brothers, but unfortunately the writing is just not up to par. Rogue is pretty much just a simple role reversal, in that the assassins in this are clearly just evil and also pretty stupid, with the Templars now looking like the good guys. There is no real nuance between what is right and what is wrong, which should have been the whole theme of the game, nothing concrete to actually make you wonder whether our protagonist Shay is good or bad. He clearly is a good guy. An example of this is when Achilles and Liam, 2 assassins on the same side, are arguing and literally knock over a piece of Eden, thus causing the collapse of a cave. It's like it's written by a 10-year-old. Talking of Shay, he's a likeable enough protagonist, very similar to others in many respects, cocky at the beginning, enraged as the game continues, and stoic towards the end, but it's a shame really that the writing of the game doesn't flesh him out and give him the respect that he deserved. On the positive side of the story, being a game set before the events of AC3, you do get to see some familiar characters making a comeback. You have Connor's mentor Achilles, Adewale from Black Flag and Freedom Cry, and the best part is that we get to spend more time with the Templar Haytham, arguably the best villain of the whole series. In terms of how you'll be spending your time, it's largely a mixture of taking over areas mixed with some main assassination missions and naval aspects, and whilst there aren't many huge set pieces, the mission of escaping the assassins and the earthquake of Lisbon are really great. It's just a shame that there aren't more well-crafted missions throughout. All in all though, Rogue is still a solid Assassin's Creed game. It doesn't change the formula, it isn't as polished as it should be, and the story lets it down, but aspects of it are great, and it doesn't deserve all the hate that it gets.
I would have just said Havana. The girls there have lusty buttocks and bosoms and feel no shame in putting them on display. But that's no slight against our lasses from home.
Now Syndicate is one of the franchise's lowest selling entries, and that is with good reason. Players' faith in Assassin's Creed was so shaken as the launch of Unity was terrible, so many players didn't pick up Syndicate until much later, or didn't play it at all. But that doesn't mean Syndicate deserved the treatment it got. We'll start with the positives, and that has to be our world. London as a setting is so iconic, and as Syndicate is set in the late 19th century, the most modern setting to date, we have all of those incredible buildings like Big Ben, Westminster Abbey and St Paul's Cathedral all there, and they're all scalable. The game has different districts too, and you'll feel the difference, so whether you're in a poor part of town, an industrial park, a richer side where all the bloody toffs live, it's truly an amazing world. Graphically too, and by the way this game is now 10 years old, it holds up really well, and if I was rating the games based on their settings, Syndicate's would be near the top. However, the game's setting and time period actually aids the game's downfall. Now, whilst many claim Unity has the best parkour system in the franchise, Syndicate's is also very similar. In fact, some ways you could say it's a smoother experience, but that's because you never really get a chance to use it. Whilst there are some parkour paths scattered throughout the map, most of our time is spent running across wide open streets or using a carriage to get around, which is why the game introduced the rope gun. Whilst initially I found this to be enjoyable, over time it gets repetitive, essentially bypassing the game's parkour altogether. Our combat too is also something that, like the parkour, is so different to what we once had. Rather than enemies dying after a couple hits, in Syndicate enemies become damage sponges, able to be stabbed literally 20 times, with the game encouraging you to put them in stun mode, where they'll wobble and you'll deal out a cool kill animation, finishing multiple enemies at the same time. There are also only 3 weapon types in this game too, but they all feel similar in terms of speed and damage, making combat feel extremely repetitive almost right from the beginning of the game. In terms of its stealth though, it's in my opinion the best in the series. Unity's stealth was already pretty great, but they further refined it in Syndicate, switching the Phantom Blade for throwing knives, a whole host of other tools including sleep darts, berserk darts, smoke bombs and volcanic bombs, a new addition to Syndicate, and you could also kidnap your enemies too, another mechanic that we haven't seen until the most recent AC Shadows. To top it off though, it also gives us the best black box missions in the franchise, which essentially are where you're given a target to assassinate, usually within a building that you have to infiltrate, and there are a variety of ways that you can approach that target. An example of this is where you sneak into an insane asylum, pretend to be a corpse, and then jump out and kill your target. Honestly, these are some of the best missions Assassin's Creed has ever given us, and easily the best part of the whole game. The rest of the content, however, is just fine. There are some good set pieces for sure, and some fun side missions too, but the main objective in this game is to capture different districts, so like lots of other AC games, but that does become somewhat repetitive over time. With our story, and we'll kick things off with our protagonists Evie and Jacob, I actually really liked them. The idea of the assassin brother and sister with totally different personalities is cool. You have the calmer and thoughtful older sister Evie, and the badly hilarious hot-headed brother Jacob, and they complement each other really nicely in this way, but Jacob, and the game in general, have this super jokey vibe that feels kinda weird, given how dark and dangerous the setting is, or should be.
Maybe next time I'll walk.
Even our bad guy, known as Crawford Starrick, is cartoonishly evil, as are some of our other Templars too, and whilst this might not be an issue for you, it just takes away from the idea of you playing this seriously in the slightest. In fact, when this game was in development, it was known as Assassin's Creed Victory, and not only showed 5 assassins as opposed to 2, but also showed a much darker, grittier Victorian London, rather than the happy-go-lucky setting we actually got. The actual storyline itself is bog standard Assassin's Creed, just working your way up the Templar ladder, but along the way we do get to meet some really great historical characters, with one of the biggest pros of the game being the side content of the World War I mission, which to me just showed that a newer setting in Assassin's Creed would totally work, and something I'm always keeping my fingers crossed for. Overall, I would say that Syndicate deserves more love. Whilst yes, the combat, lack of parkour and the story is somewhat disappointing, the setting is fantastic, the stealth is incredible, and we have some really memorable missions. If you've never played it, I would definitely recommend that you give it a go with an open mind. Now this is obviously the first Assassin's Creed full RPG game I'll be covering, but I'm not going to go down the route of if it is or isn't Assassin's Creed because it's an RPG game. It's still Assassin's Creed, it's got it in the title, and I'm just looking at whether it's a good game, not how similar it is to the original series. I'll continue to speak on the world first, and what a world we have. Odyssey is to date the largest Assassin's Creed map ever produced, set in ancient Greece, and also happens to be our oldest setting as well, set even before the Hidden Ones had come into existence. There are Greek statues, large cities, sprawling plains and mountains, and despite it being so huge, it's still very detailed, filled with a ton of side content for you to crack on with, although I would say that said content, in my opinion, is kind of poorly written and uninteresting, but each to their own. In terms of our story, this can be completed in a respectable 45 hours, and this is very much a Greek tragedy, played as either Cassandra or Alexios. The fact that you can choose either protagonist, although they'll share the same dialogue, is kind of a weird choice that I actually liked, but personally I'd recommend that it makes more sense to play as Cassandra, being the canon choice in this game. With the combat, it's pretty enjoyable, with a ton of different weapons and abilities for you to try out, with a fan favourite of this being the aptly named Spartan Kick. It's your simple RPG combat system, light attack, heavy attack, parry and dodge, all enjoyable, however the level scaling within Odyssey is probably its biggest problem. If you aren't a high enough level, then even simple enemies are going to be a huge issue for you. This wouldn't be a problem if the main storyline leveled you up quickly enough, but you are basically forced into doing side content in order to simply progress through the main storyline. With the stealth, it suffers from the same effects, where unless you focus all your skill points into building a strong stealth build, you won't be able to assassinate weak enemies, let alone strong ones, which for me is kind of the whole point of playing Assassin's Creed. That's not to say you can't stealth in this game, because you can, although blending into crowds is something you can't do in Odyssey, but to me it shouldn't just be a choice of picking between one playstyle or another. I'd like to be able to be good at both stealth and combat, please. With the parkour, and I'm going to be brutal here, it's by far the worst in the entire franchise. There are next to no parkour opportunities or paths for you to enjoy. Later in the game you eventually take no fall damage, you might as well play with your eyes closed, and you can also climb anything. When I see comments saying to me, why is that a bad thing? It's because it's not challenging at all. I'm not saying we can't scale cliffs, but at least make me find handholds or head up some specific path. I'm not playing a Spider-Man game here. I'd also be remiss to not mention the sailing and the naval combat in this game, which plays a fairly substantial part, and is what I would call a dumbed down version of Black Flag with less mechanics. Personally, I have zero time for this, but it's not to say it's terrible, it's just not for me. The actual way you'll be spending your time is where this game doesn't really work for me. Whilst there were some incredible boss fights against creatures like Medusa, the Minotaur, the Sphinx and more, and the bounty hunter system in this game is great, the rest of the game's content, especially the side content, is just very average. There is so much travelling at Odyssey, I'm constantly being sent to half of the map to meet someone or grab something, only to be sent all the way back again. I think if you're a fan of exploring for exploring's sake, you'll like it, but if you want more direction, then this game is not for you. I do like Odyssey. The world and the exploration is great, the story is okay and the combat is fun, but to me the level scaling holds it back and it's almost too large for its own good, making me stick this game in 10th place.
You want it? Go get it.
And now we come on to a game which was the first piece of YouTube content I ever made, an Assassin's Creed most sold game ever, although I'm pretty sure you can attribute this to COVID, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. As an exploration RPG, it's genuinely pretty amazing. The world, set mainly in England, but also Norway, the Isle of Skye and Ireland, Paris and beyond if you purchase the DLCs, is vast and stunning, with tons of content to enjoy. This is actually many people's complaints about Valhalla, that it is too bloated with content, which includes finding gear and weapons, tons of world events, towns and rivers to raid, mini-games, mastery challenges, hidden tombs, and so much more. The main storyline is already 70 hours long, and to complete everything, you're actually looking at a whopping 200 hours. For many, this is an absolute dream, but for others, it's something they never even got close to completing. The story itself, whilst it has its moments, is what I would call just fine. Our protagonist Eivor is your standard cocky lead with an unfortunate backstory, with the game centred around you and your clan taking over England, heading from region to region and either helping or defeating the locals along the way. I'd say the story just tips over the average mark. Eivor is cool, some side characters are great, Ivar, Fulke and Oswald stand out to me, but nothing blew my mind. The surprising thing about Valhalla is actually how the modern day segments are the best the franchise has seen in years, including some excellent lore and further world building of the whole Isu aspect of Assassin's Creed. I'd add too, if you're a fan of shows like Vikings or The Last Kingdom, I definitely think you should give this a try. You'll meet so many characters from those shows, and definitely see a ton of references too. Our lead male Eivor is played by Canute from The Last Kingdom, and there are other actors you might recognise in this as well. Combat-wise, although different to earlier games, I personally am a fan. There are tons of different weapons, abilities, and satisfying kill animations for you to decimate your enemies with, although my one complaint about it is that it is just too easy, and if you're going to play Valhalla, the hardest difficulty setting is definitely the way to go. Once past a certain level, you'll essentially become invincible, but there is so much variety with it and so many different abilities for you to swap out and try, keeps feeling fresh as you find more weapons throughout your playthrough. In terms of parkour though, as expected, it's largely non-existent. While stronger in my opinion than the upcoming Origins and previous Odyssey, there are very few parkour paths throughout, but the world just simply isn't designed for it as there is so much open space with a few decent cities for you to attempt to parkour in. Eivor's movement also feels a little slower than his predecessors, but also more realistic too. The stealth mechanics also followed this trend, where not only do you only have a few simple mechanics, a bow, a hidden blade, haystacks and whistling, but the environment being so open just doesn't aid this either, and as you're a big hulking Viking, just charging straight into battle is almost always the way to go. The focus in Valhalla is definitely on the combat, and stealth does feel somewhat of an afterthought. In terms of how you'll be spending your time, aside the masses of content, there aren't many big set pieces. There are some good battles throughout, usually ending with you completing a certain region, and some really great boss battles too, but I think because the world is so massive, it's difficult to include any really intricate and well-designed missions. Overall, if you'd like a massive RPG game with fun combat, a semi-decent story and tons of content, you're going to like Valhalla. If you're looking for a stealth and parkour based Assassin's Creed, you're not going to find it here, but for what it is, Valhalla is a truly decent RPG game and something that will always have a special place in my gaming library.
Should we take this to your chamber?
No need.
And now we come to the first ever fully fledged Assassin's Creed RPG in this ranking, AC Origins. Now, Origins came about really because of the terrible launch of Unity and the disappointing sales of Syndicate, so Ubisoft were thinking about how they could not only restore faith in its fans, but also change up the game, and they did, with a huge brand new style of Assassin's Creed set in ancient Egypt. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but if Assassin's Creed didn't decide to take the game in a different direction and go with an RPG style, I could almost guarantee that people would be moaning that the series was getting stale. They actually took a 2-year break compared to the usual 1-year break up until this point, and this paid off, with Origins doubling the sales of AC Syndicate, and with good reason. To start, the setting of ancient Egypt is quite simply breathtaking. It gave us a world absolutely teeming with life, sprawling deserts, bustling towns and cities, and to top it off, it was incredibly historically detailed, so much so that the National Geographic Museum in Washington DC made gameplay from Assassin's Creed Origins part of an exhibit about ancient Egypt. The exploration in this game is also fantastic, whether that's zooming down massive zip lines, something Bayek also weirdly does with his bare hands, sliding down massive pyramids, who knew that would be so fun, walking through the desert until you begin to hallucinate, or just exploring huge cities with detailed architecture. With our story, Origins was also the best we'd gotten, in my opinion, since Black Flag. This is because Bayek isn't our usual happy-go-lucky protagonist, he is instead an incredibly angry Magi out on his own path of personal revenge. Honestly, Assassin's Creed gives us some really awful moments for all of our characters, but almost none of them, I think, have it quite as bad as Bayek. His anger and personality shines through not only in the fantastic cutscenes, but also in his voice actor's performance, a chap called Abubakar Salim, who you might recognise from shows like House of the Dragon and Raised by Wolves. The story centres around an awesome revenge story, a husband and wife dealing with grief, the origins of the Brotherhood, and a war between world leaders, meeting famous characters like Cleopatra, Ptolemy and Julius Caesar, and for me is one that I won't ever forget. In terms of combat, this was pretty good. Nothing too crazy, your standard RPG light, heavy and special attacks, but there are a decent amount of weapons to keep things interesting, but the boss fights, similar to AC Odyssey, were also challenging and super fun. I would say it's probably the least enjoyable combat out of the 4 AC RPG games, but for what it is, I can't complain. Stealth-wise, yeah, I can't lie, it's not great. We do have a few mechanics, the hidden blade of course, which by the way, Bayek is the reason assassins chop off their own finger, whistle takedowns, a bow, hiding in bushes and sleep darts, but personally I find myself not really using anything other than the bow. The parkour too is also one of the weakest in the franchise, being almost as bad as Odyssey with a few more parkour paths, but like I said, I do think having decent parkour in such a massive RPG is pretty difficult, so I don't hold it against Origins too harshly. In terms of how you'll be spending your time, your side content largely consists of helping the people of Egypt in kill or rescue type missions, searching for items and world events, with the main crux of the game essentially sending you from one target to the next, exploring tombs and pyramids to raiding bandit hideouts and solving puzzles. The main missions in Origins I wouldn't say really stayed with me, but they weren't bad either. The game's biggest issue, and this is the same issue as Odyssey, is that the level scaling is just ridiculous. This isn't a game which you can power through the storyline and come back to the side content, you'll have to constantly take breaks and crack on with everything offered on the side. Luckily, this is a little more engaging than Odyssey's, but for me this is quite a big issue. Despite that though, Origins remains for me one of my more recent favourite Assassin's Creed games. The world is amazing, but it's the story that shines through for me, and if you're after a decent RPG, I genuinely do not think that you'll be disappointed.
I never sleep. I just wait in the shadows, and I will kill you all. Everyone who sniffed the air that day in Siwa!
On to the newest game in the series, we have the somewhat divisive Assassin's Creed Shadows. Now, the setting of Japan was probably the most requested Assassin's Creed location of all time, and with the success of Ghost of Tsushima and the controversy regarding not only Ubisoft's stock and the faux drama around Yasuke, this had a lot to live up to. And personally, I would say it delivered in many, many ways. Starting with the world, this is visually stunning. Japan is not only large, but at times an incredibly dense location, filled to the absolute brim with structures, towns, cities, open plains, snowy peaks, and so much more. As Japan in real life is 75% mountainous, you're encouraged to travel around in a certain way, which means throughout your travels you'll easily come across and constantly be stopping for various world events. The world is easily the most stunning of the whole series, and being the newest game in the franchise, you'd expect that, but part of me thinks I'll still be saying the same thing in 5 years' time. With our story focused on our main protagonist of Naoi and our second protagonist of Yasuke, I personally found this to be the most entertaining since Origins. The prologue in particular, which focuses on the destruction of the Ige clan, was genuinely one of my favourite AC game openings ever and set you up incredibly well for the story ahead. I would say though, it also follows the trend of other RPG games where you're able to follow different storylines at whichever moment you'd like to, which for me I'm not a fan of and always feel like a linear story is the way to go as it simply just makes the most sense. Weirdly though, the main storyline isn't actually the ending either, as this is coming in the future Claws of Awaji DLC, which is definitely a strange choice. Post-launch content should expand an already finished main story, not be something that completes it, but I am looking forward to how they will finish Shadows' story, as the one in the game at the moment was kind of disappointing. I haven't touched on the anime/modern day side of things that much in this ranking, because in all honesty, none of the games I've mentioned so far, other than AC1 and Valhalla, have anything actually worth talking about, but I thought I'd mention it now because not only does Shadows also have an almost non-existent and uninteresting modern day segment, it's strangely hidden behind a sort of in-game free battle pass. Maybe this is just me, but I'm personally of the opinion that they should just get rid of the modern day storyline altogether. It just does not make any sense anymore. One final negative, and this was something I'd hoped would be improved upon when I playtested the game back in January, is that the facial animations aren't good. Don't get me wrong, the actual cutscenes are phenomenal, and when I visited Ubisoft UK back in January 2025, I was told there were over 800 of them, which is an insane number, but the facial animations do unfortunately let it down and do take you out of things a little immersion-wise. Despite those negatives though, Shadows still remains a really good story, filled to the brim with emotion and emphasis on honour, and I like both Naoi and Yasuke as our main characters. I think they complement each other really quite well, with both of them finding their way in a world out to get them. Onto the combat now, and for me this is easily the most enjoyable combat we've had since the days of AC3 and Black Flag. Whilst it's pretty simple, the normal light attack, heavy attack, parry, dodge and special ability system, because each protagonist has 3 weapons and they all feel very different, I'm personally a big fan. There are lots of different enemy types in Shadows too, just keeping it fresh and interesting and mostly challenging too. I'm not ashamed to say I died a lot in this game. The stealth too, and I won't mention Yasuke here as he doesn't really have any stealth abilities, is easily one of the best stealth systems in the entire series. Not only do we have all the mechanics you'd expect like throwing knives and smoke bombs, distractions and all the rest of it, they also added new mechanics too, like crawling, turning off lights, killing people through shoji doors and more. Naoi is much weaker than Yasuke, so there is a big emphasis on using it, and in many cases you can't just charge in and expect to survive. Parkour, however, is where things aren't so black and white. Now, without a shadow of a doubt, see what I did there, this is the best parkour an Assassin's Creed RPG has ever given us. Naoi's speed is great, her flipping I think is really cool, and the grappling hook is a nice addition, but it's still ultimately let down by Japan's world. There are no real parkour paths for you to follow, the buildings are all different heights so you find you never really get yourself going, and the structure of the world just isn't really built for it. They have recently just updated the parkour, making side and back ejects quicker and higher, smoothing it out overall and adding an emphasis to Naoi parkouring onto her feet rather than her hands, and that does help. But you're not going to play Shadows expecting anything along the same lines as the earlier AC games or Unity. I'm personally not disappointed by this, it's actually more than what I expected, especially after its latest update. With Yasuke, who for all intensive purposes can't parkour, I do find this a bit annoying. I get the whole idea that he is a hulking samurai and not trained like Naoi is, but even giving us something like Eivor's parkour to me would have made way more sense. In terms of the game's content, this is pretty decent. Whilst there are no grand set pieces like other AC games, exploration in Shadows is just so damn enjoyable as there is so much stuff waiting for you at every turn. There are tons of enemies to kill and relics to find, and a lot of times I told myself just 10 more minutes, and then I'd realise another hour had passed. I wouldn't say the main missions were anything to write home about, in fact all of the content is pretty similar, but they're all excuses for you to either stealth or fight in, and as that is so well done, I don't think you'll find yourself disappointed. To summarise, Shadows for me is the best game they've delivered in 10 years. The world is incredible, the story is good, the combat is great and the stealth is amazing, but certain aspects do let it down ever so slightly. The whole point of Shadows, however, was that they needed to release a polished game, and Ubisoft definitely delivered on that. By the way guys, if you're enjoying this video so far, then hitting that like and subscribe button would go a super long way to helping out my channel. Cheers.
何やつじゃ。
私は伊賀のものじゃ。
Moving on to the game renowned as having the worst launch of all time, we have Assassin's Creed Unity. As we're now 11 years on since it released, I won't factor that into this review, and we'll start again by looking at the world, and like most Assassin's Creed games, it is amazing. From a graphics perspective, this is still holding up compared to games today, but our city is just so alive and dense, filled with parkour paths, incredible and detailed structures, and absolutely chock full of NPCs. This is by far the most filled AC game in terms of population, where crowds literally gather in their hundreds. They're also super responsive too, so if for example you shoot at them, entire swarms of people will scream and run away. This is a mixture of lavish detailed buildings like the Notre Dame and Palace of Versailles, contrast to the slums filled with dirt and despair. You are truly transported to 18th century Paris, and whenever I load up the game, it always blows me away. With the story though, it's unfortunately a bit of a hit and a miss from me for several reasons. Our protagonist Arnaud, a young Frenchman with a murdered father, is actually similar to one of our original leads Ezio, in that he is cocky, charismatic and a bit of a ladies' man, but even the whole story of Unity is a little bit like AC2. This is essentially a revenge story set within a turbulent time of Paris's history, alongside a love story between childhood friends. It's nothing special by any means, in fact our bad guy is probably my least favourite of the entire franchise, but it does have its moments and some cool cutscenes too. I would say that whilst I do like the concept of Arnaud and Elise, it isn't written well enough to have the emotional weight you'd hope it might carry. I'm not going to reflect on the modern day story in this because like other games, it barely exists. The issue with it though, and I'm not sure this can be considered a spoiler after so many years, but do feel free to skip ahead if you haven't yet played AC Rogue, is that Arnaud and Shay never meet. The opening of Unity starts with Arnaud's father being assassinated, and at the end of Rogue, you find out that it's Shay who killed Arnaud's father. However, the revenge story isn't Arnaud going after Shay, it's him going after the killers of his lover's father Elise, Monsieur Delessert. This just feels like such a strange choice to me. I feel like hunting down your own father's killer not only makes sense in terms of your protagonist's motivation, but considering Unity and Rogue released on the same day, by doing this and having the two games actually link, they would likely increase the sales as you'd feel the need to own both games. With the combat also, much like the story, it's just kind of average. It did make some changes compared to the game set before it. We have the standard attack, parry and dodge mechanics, and there are a good amount of weapons for you to use too, but the big issue with it is that Arnaud can't hold enemies in front of him to block a rifle shot like Connor, Edward or Shay could, so instead you'll find yourself having to roll constantly and find that most of the time you die is because you've been shot. It's good in the sense that you have to time your attacks correctly, you can't expect to overpower your enemies by spamming attacks, but it just doesn't flow that well and the stealth is always ideally the way to go. Personally, I found the stealth kind of tricky at first as the AI are super alert to you, and you'll find, which is a good thing, you have to really plan which routes to take and use your tools wisely. We have standard tools like smoke bombs and cherry bombs, but also have the new Phantom Blade 2, which is essentially a weapon that shoots a small knife but also includes berserk darts too. The Eagle Vision in Unity is where the game shines though, allowing you not just to spot enemies, but in some circumstances track their paths and allow you to plan ambushes. Unlike other games, it's a mechanic you'll be using often. They even added a crouch system into Unity, which is kinda nuts that we didn't have it before, although the cover system, something that you're supposed to be able to use to switch between cover points and not get spotted, personally I found it to not really follow your direction or work as it should. Lastly, they added a weird disguise mode, essentially where you can look like an NPC, simply approaching your enemy and assassinating them, but it doesn't really make much sense, and I think a simple outfit change would have been much better. Overall, the stealth system is solid and a big step up from previous games, and was definitely their focus here, even if it's a bit rough around the edges. In terms of the game's content and how you'll be spending your time, a lot of it was really well put together. This was the first game to introduce black box missions, which offered lots of variety and well-designed set pieces for you to tackle again and again. The Rift missions in particular are also fantastic and a great way of showing off the idea and the power of the Animus. These see you moving through different time periods in the same location, so in one mission you're charging towards a castle during a siege, and in another you're climbing the Eiffel Tower whilst ducking from gunfire. Whilst they did include that excellent World War I mission in Syndicate, these were never included in future games, which is a great shame. Other more minor positives included the in-game customization, filled not only with tons of individual outfits and pieces, but also being able to customize the colours too, with another bigger positive being its online co-op system, which sees you and 3 friends taking on various missions together across Paris, not only aiding to the assassin fantasy, but just also being really fun as well. The game's biggest pro though, and I've saved the best till last, has to be its parkour. Whilst yes, we have sacrificed choice for style and flair, and yes, Arno doesn't always go exactly where you want him to, there is no other Assassin's Creed game that makes you feel more like a parkour god. Arno can do the most death-defying stunts you've ever seen, and they included a new downward parkour system too, meaning you can rise and fall from great heights with utter ease. When you pair this with Unity's setting and pretty decent stealth, for me it deserves to be in the top half of all Assassin's Creed games.
All that we do, all that we are, begins and ends with ourselves.
We return to the old school now and everyone's favourite protagonist with Assassin's Creed Revelations. To start, this game follows on from the wildly successful AC2 and Brotherhood, closing Ezio's story, and should really be the pinnacle of Assassin's Creed. We'll again kick things off with our world, with this game being set in 1511 AD Constantinople, known now of course as Istanbul. I recently had someone complaining about this because technically the name Istanbul was used after the Ottoman conquest in 1453, although it wasn't formalised until 1930, but as the game refers to it as Constantinople, I will too. Not only does the city look and feel fantastic, although it's slightly smaller than Rome's Brotherhood, it has way more buildings and is super populated too, just making it feel more alive and immersive. The story, I'm pleased to say, is utterly iconic. Not only does this story flesh out and finish Ezio's arc, with him now being in his 50s, it also hails the return of a much older Altair from AC1, featured in a series of flashback missions, actually giving him some personality and showing his life as a mentor, with the story all centered around a Templar conspiracy which comes back full circle into the modern day storyline. It really is the culmination of the first 4 games, tying it all perfectly together, and to many, this is their favourite story of the franchise, and for me personally, it's definitely one of the best. In terms of combat, this hasn't really changed from previous games, and this isn't a bad thing. Ezio has pretty standard mechanics like dodge, grab, kick and counterkill, and coupled with the chain combo system and some great kill animations, this makes for a pretty enjoyable time. With the stealth, this is pretty similar. You can still utilise your assassins to perform takedowns and use the Arrowstorm ability, but they did have some additions too. Ezio now has a multitude of bombs ranging from lethal effects and traps, and Eagle Vision has been improved too, now known as Eagle Sense, actually able to now track enemies and pick up their individual trails, making tailing much easier. It's the parkour, however, that is definitely the standout entry into the series. AC2 parkour was good, Brotherhood's was even better, and with Revelations it's now damn near perfected. On top of Constantinople being a utter parkour playground, full of opportunities to leap and swing and back and side eject, the big thing they introduced was the famous addition to the Hidden Blade, known as the Hook Blade.
The hook and the blade, so you can use one or the other. An elegant design.
Not only does this allow us to climb higher quicker and swing across certain areas, they also added ziplines into Assassin's Creed for the first time, utilising the Hook Blade to swing from point to point. These new additions were truly fantastic, taking the parkour from already great to utterly magnificent. And in fact, if there was one gadget I'd like to be in every AC game, it would definitely be the Hook Blade. However, what lets Revelations down is that our time is just so short in it. AC2's storyline was around 20 hours, Brotherhood's was around 18 hours, but Revelations unfortunately is just a measly 10. On top of that, the side content in Revelations is practically non-existent, which is a real shame when you factor in that this is the last time we'll ever get to play as Ezio Auditore. The big thing they added to this is the infamous tower defense missions, and that's where you'll now be managing your assassin brothers, and whilst for many they are okay, it seems to me like a weird choice for Revelations and is more like something you'd find in a mobile game. To conclude, Revelations is still one of the best Assassin's Creed games with an awesome setting, an incredible story, and potentially the best parkour in the franchise. It's just such a shame that our time with it is so short.
The end of an era.
And now we come to Assassin's Creed 3, a game I think is very much split down the middle in terms of its fan base. For many, this was one of the first Assassin's Creed games they'd ever played, but for those who are already fans of the Ezio trilogy, it was considered a bit of a failure. To start, its story was very different to what had come before. Our protagonist was nothing like our charismatic Italian Ezio, and a lot of people just didn't like that. In AC3, you play as Connor, a Native American in colonial America, a new young assassin working on destroying the local Templars, based across the two cities of Boston and New York, as well as the surrounding frontier area. However, in AC3, you don't start by playing as Connor. The first 4 hours of the game sees you playing as Haytham Kenway, son of the very famous Edward Kenway in the next installment of the game Black Flag. This was quite a long prologue, and when you do finally get to playing Connor, it actually takes about 6 to 8 hours before he is a fully grown assassin, so the pacing of the game is a big issue for a lot of people, and I can understand why. The whole theme of the game is a revenge story, the ideas of wrong and right, and personally for me, I think the story is pretty great. Not only is the setting of the American Revolutionary War fantastic, letting you meet some very famous faces with some really great missions to boot, both villains, Haytham and of course Charles Lee, I couldn't forget to mention him, are probably the best bad guys of the whole series. The whole father and son, hero and villain mechanic has some great dialogue and just adds something that no other AC game has. With the modern day 2, it's easily the best in the franchise. Not only is the actual story of it the most interesting by far, but the missions you get to take part in are also iconic, so whether that's fighting an Abstergo, parachuting off a skyscraper or climbing across an MMA fight, leaving the Animus is actually enjoyable and even welcomed. The same can be said for the missions throughout the main game too, so whether that's sneaking into an encampment dressed as a fake platoon, rushing through trees and soldiers to assassinate your target, or just huge combat sequences, there's a lot of content to like in AC3, and it's pretty varied too. The side missions are particularly standout here, with the Homestead and Captain Kidd missions not only rounding out Connor as a character, but just offering some tremendous set pieces that make you wonder why they didn't force you to play these in the main storyline. We haven't mentioned the world yet, and compared to the Ezio trilogy, it's absolutely massive. Not only do we have two major cities of Boston and New York, both detailed, dense and full of life, but between these cities also exists the frontier, full of forests and settlements, and the game would also change seasons too, adding a whole new vibe to our exploration. In terms of our combat, in my opinion, it's literally the most satisfying in the entire franchise. Whilst combat in the Ezio trilogy was pretty great, with the graphics improvements, kill animations and minor changes, AC3 combat is something you never want to end. Whilst it's relatively easy, and to be honest I'd say combat in Assassin's Creed is genuinely quite easy, the game throws a lot of different enemies at you, gives you a fair number of weapons to play around with, but most importantly, just makes you feel like an unstoppable tank with a ton of flair and style. The parkour in some aspects is also pretty spectacular as well, but again it depends on what sort of fan you are. The one thing AC3 did was simplify the parkour, giving you less control and less parkour routes too, so for fans of the Ezio series it was a bit of a downgrade. What it added though was not only some great new animations like the one where you run through houses, but the big thing was tree parkour, allowing Connor to glide sometimes almost endlessly through masses of forest. Whilst this is a sea of linear paths, it feels amazing, and although they did include some tree parkour in the upcoming Black Flag and Rogue, it was no way near as good as it was in AC3. The Captain Kidd missions also take you to new locations and force you to take the parkour and climbing seriously, offering even more of an opportunity to use it. The stealth, however, unfortunately, is probably the weakest aspect of the game. We did sort of have assassin recruits in AC3, although they weren't utilised as often, but mainly there were just less stealth mechanics, and even those didn't work particularly well. The one good thing about stealth in AC3 was the introduction of the rope dart, allowing you to literally hang your enemies, and the bow could occasionally be fun to use when it actually worked, but I'd sometimes find the hit marker wasn't accurate, and stealth is mostly a mechanic that you'd forget about. One big aspect the game did introduce, although refined much further in Black Flag and then slightly more so in Rogue, was naval exploration and combat, and whilst yeah, if you have played Black Flag it is better there, but it's still a really fun piece of side content and paved the way for what was to come. Overall, our story is great, slow burning but with a fantastic villain, the tree parkour is amazing, the combat as I said is the best in the franchise and the world is pretty good too, and whilst the stealth lets it down, a lot of the additions they made were really enjoyable. For me, AC3 deserves to be remembered as one of the best Assassin's Creed games of all time.
What is your name?
Charles Lee. Why do you ask?
So I can find you.
I look forward to it.
Next up, we have a game I imagine many of you will rank in first place, Assassin's Creed 2. Released a massive 16 years ago, this introduced us to the absolute legend and probably one of the top 10 gaming characters of all time, Ezio Auditore. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the reasons people fell in love with AC2 was because of this character. He's witty, loyal, flirtatious, and we see him literally being born, then as a cocky young man and throughout the game transitioning into a leader. The story itself is one, if not the best in the franchise, introducing us to the world and Ezio's life before this is ripped away from us in the most brutal fashion possible, which sends us down a path of revenge and training to become the perfect assassin. Our villain of Rodrigo Borgia, or future Pope Alexander VI, is a great villain for us to point our anger at, and I always direct people to him when I see comments talking about historical accuracy in Assassin's Creed, as we literally fought the Pope in this game. Even the modern day segments, which I'm remiss to mention most of the time, is one of the strongest in the series, introducing us to some of the best modern day characters, having Desmond being rescued from Abstergo, and the introduction of the first civilization and what that means for the story in general. I think for most of you watching, this is the ultimate Assassin's Creed story that is going to stay with you for all time. The setting of Renaissance Italy is also absolutely incredible, taking you across Florence, Venice, Forlì and Monteriggioni, with all of them being super detailed and filled with life, really feeling like an accurate historical setting. The soundtrack, and granted Assassin's Creed always bangs with its soundtracks, in AC2 it's probably the most iconic. It suits the setting so well, but is also full of emotion too, almost making you feel more of Ezio's tragedy and heartbreak. The main theme of AC2, Ezio's family, is the main theme for the whole series. That's just how legendary it is. Parkour also improved onwards from AC1, and while some elements were removed, we're now much quicker, everything is more fluid and some great additions were introduced, and you can literally run from one end of the map to the next in a seamless motion without ever touching the ground. It's fair to say, I think, that in terms of a setting for parkour, it doesn't get much better than AC2. Stealth is also greater too, shaping much of the elements we see today, particularly social stealth, so blending into crowds, hiding in haystacks and sitting on benches, also hiding bodies, as well as the ability to grab and take down enemies silently. The game also allowed Ezio to blend into crowds and manipulate them, really encompassing that feeling of hiding in plain sight, and while slow firing, we also had the hidden gun too. Combat is also massively improved as well, feeling way more dynamic, smooth, and giving it an actual rhythm, with improved combat animations, a more lenient counter window, and a new kill streak mechanic to tie everything together. You could argue it made the combat easier, and I think that's accurate, but in terms of enjoyability, it's a much more fun experience than Altair had. In terms of content, we have some of the most legendary Assassin's Creed missions of all time. We saw over rooftops in Leonardo's flying machine, brawl as a young Ezio against their rival family, then ending with us infiltrating the Vatican. It's all utterly iconic, and it's rare in AC2 to find any missions that could be considered disappointing. Whilst it's not my favourite game of the franchise, it's definitely one of the best in the series, and probably the most legendary Assassin's Creed game, being the building block to all the games that came after.
Self-expression is vital to understanding and enjoying life. You should find an outlet.
I have plenty of outlets.
I meant besides vaginas.
Mother.
And now we come to AC2's sequel, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. This was originally actually going to be part of AC2, however as Rome began to grow bigger and bigger, it then became its own game, hence why it released just a year later in 2010. The story of Brotherhood literally starts off from where AC2 ends, where we return home to Montero Regione and very quickly all hell breaks loose. This introduces us to one of the best villains of the series, Rodrigo's son, Cesare Borgia, who is very different from our two previous villains as he is totally unhinged, a complete wildcard and downright disgusting, even attempting to or already does have sex with his own sister. The story sends us on to Rome, where we're tasked with rebuilding the Assassin Brotherhood, liberating the city and outside of the Animus, searching for the Apple of Eden. While some of the missions are nearly as iconic as AC2, be that more of Leonardo's War Machine missions, infiltrating a play and becoming a member of the cast, or chasing Cesare across a battlefield, the crux of this game was taking over the city, essentially taking over areas, a new goal that shaped the future of AC games, and whilst I personally enjoyed this, I can understand the argument that it is a bit repetitive. In terms of our world and exploration, our setting of Rome was absolutely gorgeous, perhaps even more iconic than Florence and Venice from AC2, allowing us to scale massive landmarks like the Pantheon and Colosseum, and whilst we are now only in one city, it's split into different districts that each have their own individual charm and feel. Now, because this was essentially an expansion from AC2, the gameplay didn't change much, and that's a good thing. The combat was improved in one main way, which is its new combo system, where if you perform a successful counter kill, the next enemy can be killed instantly with a standard attack, and this rolls on and on until you take a hit. They even made the parry window longer in Brotherhood so you had more time to react, and while some people might consider Brotherhood's combat easy, which I definitely think it is, it feels utterly fantastic. They also made one massive difference in the stealth too, which was the introduction of the assassin recruits. It is so satisfying to have a bunch of your own assassins appear out of nowhere and kill everyone in sight, but even more gratifying is the Arrow Storm ability, where you can summon a mass of arrows from your assassins to take out large groups of enemies. This isn't unlimited and will take some time to recharge, but it really does make you feel like you're living the Brotherhood trailer. The hidden gun from AC2 was upgraded massively, improving its speed, and they also added a crossbow in Brotherhood, which does kind of become your bread and butter in this game and your prime way of killing targets silently, but is something I find super enjoyable and never got tired of. Lastly, they even gave Ezio a parachute in Brotherhood which carried into Revelations, allowing you to soar over buildings and infiltrate areas in a fun way, and whilst it's a mechanic I don't use often, it's still a solid addition to our movement arsenal. Parkour is almost identical to AC2, and whilst Rome is just as much as a playground as Florence, Venice and beyond, they improved Ezio's speed and fluidity in Brotherhood, improved his grab jump, and introduced rope lines to pull us up to the top of roofs as well, just finessing it that one step further. The other big addition which never gets enough praise was a brand new multiplayer system, especially the Wanted mode, which sees you hunting players while also being hunted yourself, forcing you to pretend to act like an NPC at times and then springing out to kill your target. The servers have sadly long been abandoned now, but it remains a really incredible and quite original concept, actually aiding to the whole idea of being an assassin. My only real complaint about the game, and to some this surprise was a positive, and that's how the story ends. As this game is now 15 years old, I'm not sure it can be considered a spoiler, but do feel free to skip ahead if you like. At the end of Brotherhood, we're forced to kill our best friend Lucy, and it feels totally out of place. There were some issues with actor Kristen Bell wanting more royalties, so Ubisoft decided to kill Kristen off, hence why it feels so strange that Lucy was supposedly a Templar. Other than that though, Brotherhood can easily be described as the perfect AC game. It made minor yet meaningful improvements to AC2, the story was almost just as compelling, and first and foremost, everything about it was just fun. To be honest, you might as well consider this game to be in joint first place.
Ready to go again?
You don't need to ask.
So taking that number one spot is the utterly legendary Assassin's Creed Black Flag, widely regarded as the best pirate game of all time. We'll start with its story, which is so massively different to its predecessors. To start, you don't play as an assassin, you instead play as the pirate Edward Kenway, with the game's opening scene having you actually murder an assassin and take on his identity. From there, we are then drawn into a conspiracy between the high-ranking Templars within the British and Spanish Empire, and I won't give any more details away than that. Edward, to me, in many ways, is the perfect gaming protagonist. In many ways, he's similar to Ezio in that he's smart, cocky, and a bit of a ladies' man, but he deviates from Ezio in that he isn't really a nice person. He is, after all, a murderous pirate, and his main ambition is to get rich, which really adds a whole new layer to his character, making you question whether you're actually playing as a good guy. Black Flag probably also has the most memorable and standout side characters of all time, which include the smart-mouthed teenager James Kidd, the stoic Mayan mentor Atabai, the posh Stede Bonnet, the slave-turned-quartermaster Adewale, who will later get a game of his own and make an appearance in AC Rogue, and of course the best side character ever of Blackbeard, who utterly steals whatever scene that he is in. The modern-day storyline unfortunately does let the story down. This is the first game we're no longer playing as Desmond Miles, but as it's very short and only pulls us out of the main story a handful of times, it doesn't bother me too much. Overall, the story is a welcome change, with Edward being so charming and selfish at the same time, set amongst a fantastic backdrop, intriguing storyline, and incredible side characters. To me, Black Flag stands at the very top of Assassin's Creed storytelling, and I guarantee you that its final scene will have you weeping. The exploration in Black Flag also follows the same suit, with the Caribbean being utterly gorgeous, massive, and teeming with life. We have 3 major cities to explore, and whilst they're not particularly grand like the Ezio series, they're still parkour havens and full of NPCs. On top of that, there are tons of islands and other locations throughout, which of course you'll have to set sail to. Whilst we did have some naval aspects in AC3 which were still enjoyable, Black Flag Night On perfected them and made it an integral part of the game, now allowing us to sail to our heart's content, battle other ships, fight choppy seas, and even harpoon different sea creatures. The naval combat in this is just super fun, simple enough to learn but can still be quite challenging, and as time goes on you'll have to fight larger and more powerful ships, multiple ships at once, and may even come across other legendary vessels, really having to master everything the Jackdaw has on offer. There is even a dynamic weather system in Black Flag 2, meaning at times you have to deal with the wind, rough seas and storms, even before you come across an enemy ship in the distance. To top it off, the entire time our crew is going to be singing sea shanty after sea shanty, just making the world and exploration an absolute joy.
I thought I heard the old man say, "Leave her, Johnny, leave her."
With our combat, I'd say it's almost as good as AC3. Its main change is that it is slightly easier with fewer enemies to fight, but it doesn't deviate much more than that. The kill animations are new and utterly insane, providing multiple non-stop slow-motion brutal finishes that will satisfy even the most psycho person out there. And whilst we mainly fight with 2 swords, and 4 pistols I'd add, you can continue to pick up weapons from the ground like rifles and axes and other swords, just keeping it refreshing. The game's stealth did also deviate from AC3, which was definitely a positive. Black Flag stealth is in many ways similar to AC2, where it's all about concealing your location and using social stealth, such as blending in with the locals or hiring a bunch of ladies to walk alongside you. Tools are also a good staple of the game too. We have sleep darts, berserk darts and smoke bombs to achieve your end goal, all helping you manipulate guards to your advantage. The setting of the West Indies actually complements the stealth incredibly well too, whether you're utilising the jungle or rooftops to carry out assassinations, or hiding in giant leaves and luring enemies towards you. You can definitely tell that after the feedback from AC3, they tried to make stealth more of a focal point of the game. With the parkour, it's the map here that makes the difference. The cities can largely be traversed entirely across rooftops, and they've clearly put a number of different parkour paths along the way for you to follow, swinging around corners, being pulled up ropes, or just hopping across ledges. Within Edward's arsenal, he has the standard side eject, back eject, cancel and vaults, and whilst AC3 does have way more tree parkour, which just makes me put it ahead of Black Flag's, overall, I think Black Flag is the better finalised product. In terms of how you're actually going to be spending your time, I'd say about 40% of your gameplay is going to be travelling and battling across the seas, with the rest of your time taking part in big set pieces, infiltrating areas, and of course, tailing missions. This is a funny one because tailing missions in Assassin's Creed definitely should be a thing. However, in Black Flag, including the naval aspects, they account for 25% of all missions. This is a little bit of overkill, but it's a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things and doesn't stop my enjoyment of the game whatsoever. Overall, Black Flag is my #1 Assassin's Creed game for so many reasons. The story and our main character is fantastic, the side characters are also excellent, our world is vast and gorgeous, explorable in such a fun way with our ship, and offers super fun naval battles too. The combat is brutal and super enjoyable, the stealth aspects are great, and the parkour is also really good too. Whilst it's not a game so focused on the assassin fantasy or that delves too much into the lore of the Hidden Ones, in terms of the enjoyability factor, there is no greater experience than Black Flag. And the good news is that a remake is on the way, rumoured to release either at the end of this year or early 2026, and whilst I don't think it needs it, I also can't wait and will be playing it the second it comes out. So yeah, that's it, my biggest video ever. The joy of Assassin's Creed is that the games are so different, and not only why there is so much to talk about, but also why people's opinions vary so massively with the series. I would love to hear what your favourite AC games are and why, so let me know down in the comments, and do subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And if you've watched the video this far, then hopefully you won't mind me finishing off with a quick fundraiser. For the 2025 Assassin's Creed Community Fundraiser, this year they are raising funds for Blood Cancer Alliance and LLS, a collection of charities around the world leading the fight in the battle against blood cancer. Your support will ensure that those fighting leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma and all types of blood cancer are able to live longer, better lives, and in particular, your donations will fund life-saving research that will be used to improve diagnosis, treatment and care. I'll leave the link in the description, but any small amount you can donate will make a real difference. Thank you. And hey, if you want to get really mad about a rankings video, then why not watch my next video where I ranked the parkour systems in every AC game. I will hopefully catch you legends in the next one. Until then.